Hey, we're going to go ahead and jump into our series in Proverbs. And so, if you want to open your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 10, that's where we're going to be. We've been taking the summer to talk about this really important book, this piece of wisdom literature, not the wisdom of men, but the wisdom of God. And our subtitle for this series has been the book of Proverbs, Best Summer Ever, because summer is better when you're not an idiot. And so we are learning the ways of wisdom. We're learning how not to make foolish decisions. And we're learning how to lean into the way that God has set up this world to work and the patterns and practices that can help us experience the best life in following the Lord. And so today, I want us to look at Proverbs chapter 10, if you want to turn there. If you don't have a Bible with you, there's Bibles in the back of the room on the cart back there. If you don't own a Bible that you love to read, we would love for you to take one of those with you today to read it and hear God speak to you through his scriptures for yourself. The passage that I want us to look at today is an important one for us. It's not particularly Father's Day themed, but it's going to be helpful for us who serve in that role, and it's going to be helpful for all of us as well. So Proverbs chapter 10, verse 12, it says this: "Hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses." Hatred stirs up quarrels, not squirrels, but quarrels. But love makes up for all offenses. This is typical Hebrew poetry, a compare and contrast in these two lines of this single verse. Let's start with what feels like a clear understanding to us, but that hatred stirs up quarrels or arguments or fights. Several proverbs talk about this reality, that the way of a foolish person is someone who is looking for a fight, is looking for an argument. Back when I was in middle school and maybe in the beginning of my high school years, I thought I would be a great lawyer because I love a fight. I love arguing a point. I don't even have to think it's the best point. It has to be my point that I want to win. And so it's been a journey for me to navigate, all right, maybe winning isn't the goal if I want to live the best life and the life that God has for me. Some other proverbs that talk about this are Proverbs 15:18 that says, "A hot-tempered person starts fights. A cool-tempered person stops them." Some of you have had the moniker of hothead or hot-tempered or short fuse that you have either embraced proudly or you've wrestled against, or it's been put on you by others and you're thinking, is this who I am, or is there a better way? And the Proverbs remind us that there is a different and better way. Proverbs 17:14 says, "Starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate," or breaking a dam, it says in some translations. So stop before a dispute breaks out. Proverbs 26:21 says, a quarrelsome person starts fights as easily as hot embers light charcoal or fire lights wood. For some of you that love to barbecue or grill, or maybe you like to camp outside, you understand that there's danger when there's hot coals or charcoal that could potentially cause massive damage if it's not contained in the barbecue, in the grill, or in the fireplace. This thing spreads wider and causes more destruction than was intended. And finally, Proverbs 29:22, "An angry person starts fights. A hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sins." For some of us that may struggle in this area, quick to react, quick to be defensive, quick to argue our case, quick to prove to others that we're right. Looking to start a fight, not looking for peace. We should yield these words for today. Quarrels and arguments rarely, however, begin with the issue that we're actually arguing about. Just like me when I was younger, and maybe some of you would think maybe today, but especially when I was younger, looking for a fight wasn't about winning the day. It was about something that was deeper inside of me. These proverbs repeatedly tell us that conflict begins in our hearts with things like pride, anger, jealousy, insecurity, selfish desires, even woundedness, and yes, as the verse in chapter 10 says, hatred. If we look into the New Testament, this idea is continued for us, and in James's letter, which is also often known as the wisdom book of the New Testament, he talks about this idea of quarrels and hatred from this aspect. In James chapter 4, he says, "What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You're jealous. You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want. Why? Because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask Him, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure." And this is the issue, not that hatred starts a quarrel or starts an argument, but the question of why is there hatred in my heart in the first place? What is going on inside of me? What is it, as James would encourage us to ask, what is it that I really want? The reality is that all of us are motivated in certain ways based off of what we want in life. Do we want to be known and appreciated? Do we want to be celebrated and seen as someone who can accomplish much and carry a load? Do we want to be loved and people remain loyal to us, encouraging us and supporting us? Or do we want security in our lives? Do we want things to make sense and to line up and to not worry about what tomorrow will bring? There's a lot of things that motivate us, and we should ask, what is it that we do really want here? And for some of us, there is hatefulness, anger, or just frustration that is stirring in our hearts. And for me, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, all right, when I get frustrated and angry, when I'm just lashing out, what is it that's really going on in my heart? The reality is that anger and outbursts work. That's the hard part with it. There's some other negative emotions or even negative behaviors that don't quite have the same effect. Like breaking down and crying may not get us what we want. Whining and complaining may not get us what we want. But in a short term, anger and outbursts actually work for us. That's why we continue to go back to that behavior over and over again. We lash out when we feel like we are not safe and we need to protect ourselves. And hate or anger or outbursts creates a barrier of defense against what feels like is coming against us. This could be when your spouse comes and points something out to you and you lash out in order to shut down the criticism. It may be absolutely valid, but you lash out so that you don't have to deal with it. When your boss invites you into a meeting and you're just reflecting in your head, what could it be? What did I do wrong? What's going to happen here? And you decide to lash out in that meeting walk out of the job, quit on the spot so you don't have to deal with this unknown that's outside of your control. It's fear that causes us to respond in this way. The reality is most people don't choose anger and frustration because we enjoy being hateful or venomous or angry people. We choose it because it feels like it solves the problem. But it doesn't actually solve the problem. And I want to talk about a couple of ways that this first part of this proverb actually works against what we're trying to accomplish. First, hate creates distance, and especially creates distance in relationships. When someone hurts us, we experience something that nobody really likes to be, and that's vulnerability. The Superman emblem that we envision is on our shirts no longer is valid because we've actually been hurt. But love requires us to be open to others. Moving in real healthy relationships requires forgiveness that needs us to risk. Trust requires that we be courageous to have healthy relationships. But hatred, angry, and outbursts of frustration require none of those things. Hatred says things like, I'll never let you hurt me again. I'm going to keep you at arm's length. We reduce people to, when we think about them, we define them based off of their worst moment or the worst thing they've ever done. Or we choose to blame them perpetually. It's always their fault. And we do that to protect ourselves so we don't have to think about what do I own in this relationship. Not that we own everything, but there may be a part that we have to own. Hatred, anger, frustration, it feels powerful in the moment because it removes our sense of vulnerability. That moment where we feel like we could be hurt or we're not safe. If I power up and put on this thing, this hatred, this moniker towards others, then I am creating what feels like a safe place. Second, hate simplifies complex people. This has kind of been the thing that I've been reflecting on over the past several years, the complexity of humanity. I really am mostly a black and white person, and most of the time I'm a right and wrong person, and most of the time I think I'm right about everything. And so to think through the complexity, most of the time, babe, not all the time. To think through the complexity of my own humanity and other people's humanity, and then the entanglement of our relationships with one another has caused me to see the beauty of God's creative power and also to lean into his grace even more in the midst of that mix. Love requires me to hold the tension of complex human relationships. I can admit that person hurt me, and they're made in the image of God. I can admit that person sinned, and they may have done that because they come from a place of woundedness and brokenness. I can admit in the midst of this complexity that a person disappointed me and didn't come through in what they said, and yet God still loves them. It's way easier to villainize and to say, oh, they screwed up, therefore they're a screw up. But we wouldn't want that same lack of graciousness to be dealt to us. Hatred, anger, frustration, blaming, it simplifies everything and everyone. You're bad, I'm good, that's the end of the story, deal with it. So I distance myself from the bad people, and the more people hurt me, for whatever reason, the more distance I have in those relationships, until eventually we find ourselves very alone. Why? Because we've ignored the complexity of our humanity. And finally, hate actually creates a false sense of safety. There's an irony in all of this, and that's that hatred, anger, and these outbursts protect us from future wounds because it's going to create this distance while imprisoning us in our own hatred. It's ironic that we feel like this is creating freedom from this person or this relationship, and yet we're now being imprisoned in our own resentment and bitterness. Hate builds walls around our hearts, and the problem with walls is that while they keep the pain out, they also keep love out. Rob Reamer, he says this, the problem, and he calls them shields around our heart. The problem with shields is they are indiscriminate. They not only block out the person who's trying to hurt us, they block out God from trying to heal us. This is why Paul, when he talks about the armor of God in living life in spiritual warfare, he says that we should hold a shield of faith. Not faith in ourselves, but faith that God will protect us. That's the shield of faith. It's not about me being defensive. It's about trusting God to protect me. And this is why, this idea of hatred and creating distance and a false sense of security, this is why general hatred or stereotyped hatred towards a certain type of person is so evil in God's sight, is because it is so damaging, wounding, and horrible for us as humans. Racism, sexism, ageism, classism, etc., are all evil in God's sight because they move us towards a perceived distance and create calloused hearts, not allowing the love of God to come in. We may have these generalized points of hatred, but generally for most of us, it's an individual that comes to mind, not a type of person, but an individual that comes to mind that, again, we may not describe, as this proverb says, as hating, but we hold unforgiveness towards. We refuse to let them off the hook for what they've done for us. We refuse to pay the debt, because it costs something to pay the debt that we feel like they owe us. And unforgiveness, if it hangs out in our soul and finds soil to grow roots into, becomes bitterness. And now we're interpreting that person, every behavior that they have, we interpret through the negative experience that we had with them. And so even if they do something kind to us, we interpret that through the pain that they caused us. And now we're processing, okay, well, they must have an ulterior motive. How can I trust them? Do I really believe that what they're saying, even though it sounds kind, is really true? Bitterness, if we let that churn in our soul long enough, becomes resentment, and then anger, and then rage. You see, this kind of anger and hatred, if we allow it to remain, it actually holds the seeds of disaster, damage, and destruction in our relationship with others, but also in our relationship with God. No wonder Jesus says this in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. He says, you've heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. Well, we would all say, yeah, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. That makes sense. This was the law of Moses. This was the boundary of society. But Jesus says, but I say to you, if you're even angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. That seems pretty extreme, Jesus. Like, don't I deserve to be angry when somebody hurts me? Yeah, you can't control your response in the moment. But will you let that thing grow roots in your soul? Why? Hatred just leads to quarrels. It leads to arguments, anger, rage, and ultimately is the seed that holds the behavior of wishing the worst on someone. Maybe I wouldn't do it, but you think in your heart, in your worst moments, in your greatest frustration, in your wounded self, in your hurt self, man, if something bad happened to them, I wouldn't feel sad. I'm not going to their funeral. And it doesn't take long when we allow this to stay in our hearts. This proverb in Proverbs chapter 10, that hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses, is actually quoted by one of Jesus' closest friends and followers, Peter, in 1 Peter 4:8. He says this as he's closing out his first letter. He says, "But most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins." He's quoting this proverb. Peter knows, because he wasn't perfect. He put his foot in his mouth all the time. He made huge mistakes. That it wasn't his perfection, but God's kindness and love that was shown to him that allowed him not to cover up, not to make excuses, not to enable, but to overcome his sin. And this is the question that raised in my heart as I was thinking through this. For love covers a multitude of sins. Well, what's the difference between this kind of love that covers a multitude of sins and enabling bad behaviors in people? For some of us, it feels like a really blurry line. How do I live this kind of love but not just perpetuate damaging behaviors in other people? Peter, when he's writing this, he doesn't mean to ignore sinful things. And he's not saying that this kind of love pretends that wrong things didn't happen. When Peter is saying, and when Solomon is saying in Proverbs 10, that love covers a multitude of sin, it's a sense that it refuses to expose or broadcast or magnify or weaponize in every offense. This is the idea of saying this sin doesn't have to be on display for everyone. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means I don't need to go tell all my friends what my spouse did. I don't need to publish it on social media. I don't need to write an expose. I don't need for everything that happens in my life to be out in the open for everybody else to see, especially if my motivation is to cause more and ongoing damage in the life of that person. This is the kind of love that covers, not covers up and pretends it doesn't exist. Bad things do need to come into the light, but it doesn't need to come into the light to weaponize every offense. What does this kind of love do? Well, this kind of love asks a really important question. Is this thing that happened something that I need to confront? Or is it something that I can forgive or overlook? Now, if you are in a place where you are feeling very insecure and unsafe, we can justify extremely horrible and damaging things as things that I should overlook or just forgive, right? People in abusive relationships that say, oh, he's not always like that. Or he said he's going to change. Or he came to church with me and he says he's a new man, right? If we are insecure and we are fearful of what the future holds, if we do confront it, it can cause us to shrink back. This kind of love isn't saying what is best for me in this situation. This kind of love is saying what is best for this other person. Do I need to confront this behavior? Or is it something that I can overlook? Am I annoyed when the cap of the toothpaste is left off? Yes. Is it something that I need to confront? Probably not. I can probably overlook that. Not everything that annoys you needs to be confronted. Not everything that frustrates you needs to be addressed. Love doesn't make every issue a conversation for the dinner table or a special family meeting. Many marriages and friendships and churches even die because every irritation, every preference, and every violation that becomes a frustration becomes this airing of grievances that happens. This is the kind of love that covers a multitude of sins. Let's look at some examples. This kind of love covers when you assume that this could be a misunderstanding instead of evil intention. Maybe I just didn't understand what you said. I could ask a follow-up question to get clarity and not jump to defensiveness, not jump to hurt. Or maybe you choose not to, like I said, not to bring up every annoyance. You choose to extend grace when somebody is having a bad day. This kind of love covers a multitude of sins when it refuses to gossip about someone else's failures. And this kind of love covers a multitude of sins when you choose not to keep score and bring up the point differential every time you talk. Point differentials are great for World Cup soccer. They are bad for healthy relationships. Okay? And so, again, we need to be able to distinguish with the Lord, with trusted counsel, the difference between love and enablement. In summary, enablement says, I love that person too much to confront them. This could look like covering up an addiction, making excuses for abusive behavior, constantly rescuing somebody from irresponsible choices. You just constantly are pumping time and money into them, and they continue to make irresponsible choices. This enablement is when you pretend that sin isn't really sin. You say things like, it's no big deal, or they're a good person, or they'll figure it out. And so you show up again and again and again instead of what we talked about last week, which is sometimes there's the natural negative consequences of our behavior that God uses to transform us and shape us. But love says, I care too much about this person to leave them where they're at. Love is willing to have hard conversations. Love is willing and must tell the truth. Love sets boundaries, and love moves towards reconciliation. Love always tells the truth and holds the line with kindness and grace. And I'm grateful that we can look to Jesus as our perfect example. Many of us know the story of Jesus and the adulterous woman. But if you're not familiar with it, some religious leaders set up this trap for Jesus. And they talked some guy into having an adulterous relationship with this woman so they could punish the woman. Not punish the guy, but punish the woman. And as was the custom during that day, it was to bring this woman out into public for a public discipline, trial by public jury, and death by stoning. And so they bring this woman to Jesus in an attempt to trap him, in an attempt to get him to break the law of Moses and therefore be a false teacher and all of these other things. He says, they say, Jesus, what should we do with her? And Jesus says, well, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And so they all walk away, realizing that they are unfit to judge this woman. Only God is fit. And Jesus, God in the flesh, the only one fit to cast a stone upon this woman, holds space for her with grace, but then after everyone is dispersed, looks at her and says, go and sin no more. After holding space for a gracious response, giving her an opportunity to make a different decision, he doesn't say, oh, dearie, it's okay. It's no big deal. Don't you worry about it. It'll be fine. I understand the family that you grew up in. I understand that the situation that you're in. Jesus doesn't make any of those excuses. He doesn't enable her behavior and her choices in any way. He holds space and grace, and then he says, well, let's not do that anymore. Go and sin no more. Jesus never confuses acceptance with approval. And yet in our own heart, we struggle with that over and over again. And that's why we need to look to Jesus. Love covers sins, Peter tells us, but it doesn't cover up sins. And that's the difference. All of this reminds me, and this study was done about marriages, but some of the information that came out, you could apply to relationships, you could apply to your relationship with your parents or with your kids, work relationships, friendships, people that you share space with, all of these things, all of your relationships. There was a study that was done out of the University of Washington. It's called the Love Lab Study, and it was done by a husband and wife team, Dr. John and Julie Gottman. And some of the studies that have come out about this determine whether you're a master of love or a disaster in love. That was kind of the comparison. A master of love or a disaster in love. And what they did is they researched all of these couples and they tried to find the common denominators or the common attributes that led to a marriage that stood the test of time, that lasted through the ups and downs of life, the good times and the bad times, the sickness and the health. And they were trying to figure out, all right, could we distill this down to 8 to 10 attributes of these relationships? And to their shock, they could only find one common denominator, the one attribute that was needed to be in a marriage that stood the test of time. Do you want to know what it is? Of course you do. To be a master of love, the thing that you had to have is a baseline of kindness and generosity towards your spouse. You thought the best about them in the worst times with them. The couples that lasted through the ages, through the ups and downs, actively looked at their environment for things that they could appreciate as opposed to things that they could pick apart. They actively look to extend grace and to have a generous explanation for their partner's mistakes. That's all it takes? Kindness, graciousness, and generosity. Of course, God told us. Hatred leads to a bunch of quarrels, but love covers a multitude of sins. Not enablement, but true love that presses in, has hard conversations, and moves towards kindness with one another. And so out of this study, there's just 3 practices. And so I want to share 3 practices that'll help you have the best summer ever, and not a summer of fighting, but a summer of love. First off, for any important relationship to you, to daily practice 3 thank yous. The 3 thank yous are just to say 3 things out loud, not just to think about them, but to say them out loud to that person, 3 things that you're grateful for in them. It may be the smallest thing. Thank you that you didn't wake me up this morning. Thank you that you chew with your mouth closed. Thank you. Whatever you can find. Why? Because the relationships that last are looking for opportunities to be grateful. They're not looking for opportunities to be judgmental. So 3 thank yous. Second, a practice that you can have for this is to ask for help. Ask for help. It's when things become overwhelming, frustrating, and disappointing that we choose criticism, arguments, and judgment. We say things like, "You never take out the trash," or "You always leave your dishes in the sink to soak," right? Whatever the case may be. We choose criticism instead of skipping it and just getting to what we really want, and that's a different behavior. We think criticism will shame them into a different behavior, but really, all we have to do is ask for help. Skip the criticism and say something like, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed tonight. Could you help me take the trash out? Wouldn't that be so much easier? Just skip the judgment, skip the argument, skip the frustration, and just ask for help. And then thirdly, find time for a daily debrief. Find time where you can sit down, whether it's over lunch at work or it's at the end of the day, over dessert or sitting outside as the sun sets, just 20 minutes where you only talk, where somebody else talks and you listen. And the only thing that you can talk about are the stressors that aren't the other person. And you know what? I just came home and my boss is an absolute moron. And I just need to talk about it. And that's why I was so cranky and upset, or things didn't go how I expected in that presentation, or my test was harder than I thought it was going to be. And so you can talk about everything else except it's not 20 minutes for you to go, this is how you drove me crazy today. But practice a daily debrief. If you do these three things, I think we'll grow in this kind of love that covers a multitude of sins. We'll grow in healthy relationships and the kind of graciousness and kindness that Jesus demonstrates for us. So as the worship team comes up, I'd love for us to just reflect on this passage. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is often known as the love chapter. And that's because it gives such a great definition and description of what love does. It's not just something that we feel, and we don't choose to love others when we feel like they're lovable. We choose this and we behave in this way because Christ loved us in this way first. And so as we prepare to respond in worship, let's just reflect on this passage together and be reminded. It says, love is patient and love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith. It's always hopeful, and love endures through every circumstance. May it be true of us.